Someone asked me the other day, what's a C7? What's a 7 bit? What does that mean on the page? I know what C is. C is this. But what's C7? Okay, so I think it's probably best to start this video with a little bit of a historical context rather, of what a 7 chord is. Now, in Baroque and classical terms, a 7 chord is actually called, more sort of correctly, a dominant seventh. Now, what that means, if we've got C, that is the 5th chord of F. So if F is the parent key or the root key, C is the 5th chord. So you can have a chord that does this. But the 7th is used as an auxiliary note within that C chord to help it link better to that parent key. So C to F or C7 to F. That sounds a little bit better. Now, C7 is this. If we put my little finger, we've got the standard C shape, so it's the C, open C shape on guitar. So you got your first string left open, the second string has your first finger on, then we've got an open string, the G, then middle finger on the 2nd fret, 4th string, and then we've got the 5th string, 3rd fret. So there's your C. Like that. And then the 7th is your little finger on the 3rd string, 3rd fret. So it's quite a subtle sort of different sound, and it does invoke, when you're thinking of sort of Baroque and classical terms, it does invoke that sort of tension that needs to be released. So tension and release, like that. But in rock and pop terms, the 7 chord is used on its own, hence the fact that you don't see the word dominant written anywhere on a chord sheet. It just goes C7 or F7 or whatever, and you can get minor versions as well. So C7 is this. Now if we play C as an A shape, we can get C7 by doing this. I took my 3 fingers that were together, I took my middle finger off and moved the annular finger up to where it was, and then kept the bar, like that. And if we go to a G shape, so I barred at 5th and put the G on, it's quite cumbersome, this one, but the process still works. So if that's C7 now, what I do is this. Now, it's quite clumsy, that one, so it's not used very often. But this particular one, it's quite helpful to see the sort of the maths of it, of how the 7 chord is formed, because that makes it easier to sort of learn the theory of it. So we've got here a C chord. What happened was that my top note there, which is a root note, came down 2 frets or 2 half steps or 1 full step. So that's what gave me my C7 chord. So it's worth remembering that little nugget of information. A root note higher up in the chord needs to drop 2 frets or a step or 2 half steps in order to become a 7 chord. So if we go to my E shape now at 8th fret to play my same C chord again, what we have here is a root that's in the middle. And that root note drops 2 frets again. So instead of this, if I take my little finger away, it actually is being played by, that string is being played by my bar finger there. Like that. That's a bit more of a subtle one, that one, because the 7 is in the middle of your chord rather than at the top as it was with your G shape. So that's a bit more obvious. And then we have the D shape to finish with. We've got this. So there's a D shape barred at 10th fret to give you your same C major chord, your C chord. And then we have, this is the root note here. So that's how you work out that that is C7 again. So we've got 5 different ways of playing it. We've got the C shape, the A shape, the G shape, the E shape, and the D shape, like that. You can make a riff up that contains some of those things. If you're playing rhythm guitar and it says C7, why just stick with one C7 chord? You could play a couple. One thing you could do. Now on the E7 shape that I just played at 8th fret, I also put my little finger on this fret, 2nd string, and I've actually doubled the 7th that's in there. Now the 7 bit comes from the scale. If I play a scale on C, the 7th note is actually this one. It's called the leading note because it leads on back onto the root, like that. But in a C7 chord, that leading note is flattened. So I go down a half step or a fret, which gives me my 7th that I'm using in all of these chords. Now, the same thing can work with a minor chord. If we've got C, you can't play a C minor as an open shape here because you'd have to make that, and can't do that. But if I show you C major and C7, C minor is this, and C minor 7 is that. So the same operation has happened. My root note that's higher up the chord has gone down a step or 2 half steps or 2 frets, and I'm playing a minor chord instead. Now a minor chord has the flattened 3rd. There's your major, there's your minor. So there's my C minor and my C minor 7, like that. And then I can do that. I can't play a G minor shape either, but I can go to a C minor. There's your C, C minor, C minor 7. Notice I braced the bar finger with another finger here because you've got to sort of press down all of those strings, and it's a bit more reliable if you use 2 fingers on one on top of the other to do that. Some people do it without. I've just got used to it over the years. So that's your C minor 7 like that. And then your D minor 7 shape is this. Well, you could actually use 2 fingers at the top here. So that's a bit of a higher inversion and not used so much because you can only use 4 of those strings. You can't use all 6, or at least 5, of them, and that's a big difference. So there are your minor 7s. And then you've got your D minor 7 at the top. You can tell I don't use that one as much because it takes me a little bit longer to find it. Now, we have major 7s as well, those sort of nice dreamy sort of chord shapes. Any of you who know that Gymnopédie number 2, the Eric Satie, you get that real dreamy sort of happy sound. Now what that is if I go to my C shape, my A shape at 3rd fret to get my C chord again, the 7th only drops by 1 fret or half step, like that. And you can also get that with your C chord by taking your root note here and lowering it so it becomes an open string. So there's your C major 7. Now on the page it'll say Maj 7. That means major 7, and that's that dreamy sound that you've got there. Some keyboards and some sort of shorthand give it major 7 a large M instead of a small m, but it's not very nice because it's a bit difficult to read. M's everywhere. You think, oh, big M, oh, it's major 7. It's just not very nice. In jazz terms, major 7 is actually a triangle. So you have C with a triangle and then 7. That's C major 7. Now, as an E shape, that gets a bit more tricky because we've got C here. Now, if I lower my root note by 1 semitone, I get that. That's fine. But you don't want a root note above your 7th. No, doesn't work. So the best thing to do with this is, if you get your E shape, your C chord, move the shape down a string and then down a fret, but without moving your bar finger. So you end up with this. Your bar finger plays 8th fret here and 7th fret over the other side. So it's actually going diagonally across 2 strings, and then at the same, 2 frets, and at the same time muting the 5th string. And actually there we've got 2 of those major 7ths. So it kind of amplifies that effect, really. And the same thing with the D shape. If I go like this, now that's quite nice, because D is usually a D shape at 10th, giving you your C, is that. Like that, you've got now a line straight across. So a major 7 shape is quite nice as a D shape. There's your D major 7. So here at 10th fret it becomes C major 7. Now you can have that Kiss Me, that tune that goes. It uses a major, then a major 7, then a dominant 7th or normal 7, back to major 7, like that. So there's one more type of these 7th chords, which is worth mentioning here. It's not used very often. You will find it in a particular chord progression, but it's called a minor major 7. So it's the only other combination. In all of the chords so far, the root and the 5th have stayed the same, and we've only varied the 7th, or whether it's major or minor. But the combination we haven't done yet is the major 7th, but it's a minor chord. So you end up with this. Now it's not a chord that you'd strum like that. People would think your guitar's out of tune if you just kept strumming that. However, if we do something like this, C minor, major 7, minor major 7th, minor 7, it kind of fits in nicely. Now the function of that chord, I mean, it's obviously it's another chord, but that minor major 7th actually went down another half step to the major 3rd of your next chord. So there's all sorts of tricks that you can now play. With all of these 7 chords, you can be creating this quite intricate harmony that's going on in the background. Lots of people think, oh, they're jazz chords, so I won't use those. Actually, they're not jazz chords at all, really. I mean, there are chords that are used more in jazz, but a chord is a chord is a chord. You know, it's a collection of notes that give a particular sound. So, you know, and you can get some quite complicated stuff going on in, you know, in the rock and pop stuff that you hear in the charts now, you hear on the internet. There are quite complicated things going on because it, you know, it has to be, it's music, it has to say things, it has to invoke a certain flavour, and that's what all of these 7 chords do. Now, moving on, just briefly, above the 7th, we can have the 9th. So if you see C9 written, it's actually a C7 chord, but with an extra note. Now, there are differences. Some where it says C add 9, that's actually a bit different. So if I put C7 down, there you go, that's C7. But the ninth of C is that note. So you think, well, how am I going to play that? Ooh, there you go. There's a C9, but there's no major component anymore, which is the third note of your scale. So it's okay, but a better version would be this. There you go, that's much fuller now, and it retains the fact that it's a major chord. Now, this is a bit of a pig to play. So the steps are, put your annular finger across 3 of the strings, the top 3 strings of the guitar, then your index finger a fret behind on the 4th string, and then you bring your middle finger over to arch over this note here so it doesn't touch this string to play the 5th string, and then lean against the 6th so that it's not sounding. That means you can play all of those notes, all of the strings, without it without it hearing that open string. Because you really want the root at the bottom of your chords, unless you're playing the bass as well. Now that C9 means that the 7th has to be there. There it is, the 7th. There's your 9th, and the one at the top is the 5th, which is endemic in your chord anyway. Now the 5th isn't overly necessary to play. It doesn't really need to be there, actually. I know it's endemic in the chord, but it's actually present in that note because of the harmonic series and how that works. You can see another of my videos about that. It's also not necessary to play the root note because the bass player's playing it. So your C7 could just be this, called rootless inversions. It's a little bit, you have to sort of learn the theory of it, and then you can start taking stuff away so that it doesn't sound so full. You can just do that or this. This chord here and this chord are basically exactly the same. I just haven't put the root note in, which you could add, but it's a bit of a handful and doesn't sound very nice, so I started muting some of the strings. So we end up with a sort of a diamond shape here. So you put your index finger on the 5th string, middle finger also on the 5th string, but 2 strings away. 3rd string, yeah. So 5th string, 3rd string on the same fret. Then 4th string and the 2nd string, you bring your 2 fingers up a fret, like that. So they're the same notes. You could do the same thing here. But it's a bit further up the guitar, and with this without a cutaway it becomes a little bit tricky. So that's a C9. Now C add 9, that is not the same thing, because the add 9 means that the 7th isn't there. Now it's a bit of a pig to play this, but you can do it with this here. If I've got a C chord like this, I can make that into the 9th by stretching 2 frets. Now, the C add 9 means that the 3rd, the thing that makes it a major or minor chord, has to be there. Because if I played it like this, there's no major 3rd anymore. So that is technically called sus2. Now what happens with that is that the sus means suspended, or it means tension. That's what it basically means. So you'd end up with this C sus2, which resolves onto a C chord. You might have the sus4. That kind of thing, but that is unrelated really to the 7th chord that this video is about. So that is essentially a compendium of these 7 chords. You can go even further. You can have the 11th, which would usually be the sharpened 11th. So C7 sharp 11 would be this. Notice it's not called a 9 anymore. What happens is that if you call something like sharp 11 or 13, the 7 has to be there, plus a smattering of the notes that sort of happen on the way. So for example, the 9th is in this. We've got the root, 3rd, 7th, 9th, and sharp 11. That's kind of a big band ending chord. You can have a 13th. So we've got this. Root, 3rd, 7th, 9th, 13th at the top. You could have flat 13. Flat 9, flat 13. Then you're getting into the sort of the more of the sort of what you would find in jazz a bit more. So the 7th chord, once you know your 7th chords and you know that you can add the 9th, that is a huge sort of palette for your musical armoury.